So it's like a really exciting time to be an immigration consultant in Canada, when we have like the battle between, values, it feels like, between Canada and the US. I'm getting lots of phone calls from people in the US asking me, how do I immigrate to Canada? How do I escape, President Trump and the MAGA, revolution? And that's, it's great. I love it because, like as a Canadian, as someone who believes in the values of what we consider Canadian, it's the sole purpose why I got into becoming an immigration consultant, right? Because if you don't believe in what you're doing at the end of the day, then how can you honestly tell people, look at them in the eye and say, listen, this is what I think, this is why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to actually to make Canada more Canadian. Like our value system is based on, tolerance and progression and acceptance, a concern for nature, a concern for each other, so when we're challenged, when you corner us and then say, Trump says, I'm going to annex you, it just makes us more like that. It just makes us more Canadian. It says, you know what, we know who we are. We don't need you. We don't need you to define us, and we're going to be our own thing, right? So I'm kind of excited in a little weird way about what's happening to Canadian culture as a result from Trump's threats on Canada. But this is the purpose of my video tonight, is not to talk about, political issues. It's more so to talk about the practicality of how to immigrate to Canada from the US, how to become a permanent resident. Permanent residency is the equivalent of a green card in Canada, which is one level down from citizenship. So citizenship, we have, passport level, you are able to vote, and then, you can actually live outside Canada for indefinitely, come back to Canada as a citizen and continue living here. So that's citizenship level. Below that, one below is permanent residency. And that's usually the goal for most people immigrating to Canada, because once you become a permanent resident, it's just a question of time before you're eligible for a citizenship application. So when I'm doing content on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, I'm talking about pathways to PR. You'll hear that a lot when you're researching about permanent residency to Canada, pathways to PR. You'll also read about how to become a PR through our express entry system. And then people contact me and they say, "Hey, Chris, I'm eligible for express entry. I want to become a PR," right? And you have to bring them back down to earth. It's not that simple. You just don't apply and get accepted, right? There's two steps. The first step is to be eligible. Second step is to be selected. Okay? Immigrating to Canada is like being, wanting to get into a fancy nightclub, right? There's a lineup outside, then there's actually getting in. And some people in the lineup will never get in. And that's a fact. So the criteria to get into the lineup is different from the criteria to get into the nightclub. All right. So when I'm working backwards from how to become PR with someone, I'm starting with, the premise that if we're not in the nightclub, we're not even having a pathway altogether. Right. So two options usually are on the table for anyone trying to immigrate to Canada from the US. Actually, three. The first option is if you're married to a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. That's easy. That's all day long. That's family sponsorship. That is just a question of applying and getting through the process, which is in itself a little bit complex, but that is the process. Option two is an economic immigration. So directly to an employment offer. Employment offers give you value on the skills and the points that you accumulate in that pool of applicants in the express entry system. So you have to get a score in that pool to be high enough to be selected. That's how the kind of the nightclub lineup works. So once you enter the pool, your score is allocated, and then if you have a high enough score, you will get selected. you will not have a high enough score. These days, our system is so kind of like overpopulated that we're only drawing from people who have, very, very high level skills and experiences in Canada. So you have to basically have work experience in Canada or a job offer in Canada to have a chance, right? So immigrating to Canada for a U.S. citizen would come back to, do you have a job offer on the table, right? If there's a company that wants to hire you, or better yet, if your company in the U.S. wants to transfer you to a company in Canada, then that totally is an option, right? You can go from, worker in the U.S. to work permit holder in Canada, and then it's just a question of time before you accumulate the experience you need to get the points you need. There's a ton of content online about express entry. You'll see, express entry draws and all this kind of stuff. That's our system for immigration, economic immigration. So that's that nightclub lineup. You have to get into the system first. You're allocated a score. When your score gets high enough, you will be selected to apply. Every month or two, or twice a month even, the government will issue these draws, these selection draws. They'll say the cutoff score is 510 points, and everybody above the cutoff gets invited. Everybody below stays in the lineup. That's how that works. So being eligible for express entry does not mean that you'll have a pathway to permanent residency. It just means you're going to be in that pool or lineup of applicants. So how do you get those scores? Just to put it in perspective, okay, the current cutoff score is 521 points. To have 521 points in today's, most of the applicants in the pool are below 450, by the way. But to have 521, a master's degree, minimum, under the age of 35, okay? 2 years experience working in Canada, 1 year experience working outside Canada. If you have that formula, you're at 521. So how does that work for a U.S. citizen who wants to then immigrate to Canada, and they're not even touching the surface here, right? So then you have to work backwards. You say, listen, we're not going to go after PR right away. We're going to use PR as our goal, right? But we're going to back it up, and we're going to actually start at the, do I have a job offer level, right? Because you need to go from, applicant to worker in Canada. The experience, the work experience you get in Canada is worth way more in terms of points, right? And then those job offers you get are, again, worth more. So employment offers is the key to economic immigration if you're going to go through the express entry system for a U.S. citizen. That is just plain fact. You cannot avoid it. You have to go through the express entry system. Everyone does. So some people, who are retired, they don't even want to work. They just want to live in Canada. They come up here and they kind of work remotely. That's fine too, but you're going to be a visitor. You're not going to be a permanent resident because you will never accumulate work experience in Canada in that capacity because you're working for a U.S. company remotely. So, that's fine because people are okay with that. They just want to be in Canada, enjoy our culture and our society and our environment and everything. But you'll never get the benefits of a permanent residence, which is number one thing. It's healthcare. Let's be honest. Like them when people are like, hey, can I just live up here, and not immigrate? Can I just be here and, retire? What do you mean by retire? Oh, I just want to spend some time here, spend my money, or build a home, whatever. Oh, you mean you want healthcare? Yeah, of course I need healthcare. Well, sorry, you don't get healthcare unless you're a permanent resident, right? Or a worker or a student. You have to have one of these statuses under your belt. So getting the permanent residency for a U.S. citizen through economic immigration requires an employment offer to get the work permit to then progress through our immigration system. So that's a whole pathway in itself. And there's stages to that can happen a multitude of different ways. You can get an employer-sponsored job offer where they do all the work for you and present you with the work permit. Or you could have a company transfer situation where a company from the U.S. transfers you to a company in Canada, right? There's a variety of ways those offers of employment come. And I could make, endless content on those processes by itself, right? Each case is going to be different on that capacity, okay? But I just want to make the point before I go into option 2 for how to immigrate to Canada. I wanted to make the point that you have to go from work permit into permanent residency. You cannot just go directly to permanent residency. That's not a thing in Canada, right? Option 2, or it's not a thing right now in Canada in terms of our immigration system. Option 2. So people are from the US, they have trouble getting the job offer to get the work permit. Like that's a legit concern. Like I can't even get an offer of employment. No one wants to hire me from the US. I'm sending resumes out there. I'm looking at job boards. I can't find anything to hire me. What do I do? Okay. If you're married or single, it doesn't really matter because the outcome is going to be the same. This is the study option. The study option involves one person out of a married couple going back to school at the master's level or the PhD level. Why does it have to be the master's level? Because if you're a student in Canada, the spouse of you gets an open work permit. So they get the permit to work without even having a job offer, right? So now you can just go show up at a company and get the experience that you need to get the points you need to immigrate, right? But how do you get the work permit to begin with? Your spouse is the person that is doing that for you because they're studying in one of our public universities at the master's level, okay? So the master's program usually goes for about 2 years. So you have a 2-year open work permit, right? So within that 2-year timeline, it's very plausible that you're going to find a pathway to permanent residency because you're going to get a job offer, accumulate the work experience, and so on. So a study pathway for couples works really well. One person works, one person goes to school. And in that combination of things, we have a pathway that emerges. Now, if it doesn't emerge within the 2 years that your wife is going to school, there still is a reprieve, which is what's called the postgraduate work permit. So after you graduate, you get another permit to stay in Canada as a worker. So you graduate from your master's program and then you go into like a 3 or a 4-year work permit situation. So now you have another 3 years after your 2 years that you've been in Canada for. So now you're in Canada for 5 years now with status, right? Collecting healthcare, right? Working or studying. Your kids are here with you studying locally for free at the high schools. You're all covered by healthcare. Your husband's working, your spouse is working, right? So the study pathway makes so much sense for Americans immigrating to Canada because it upgrades your education, right? And gives you a tool now to use to be employable, but also gives you so much time and space and runway to look for those options, those opportunities that come in, mainly employment offers. But those opportunities wouldn't be there, those employment offers wouldn't be there if you were not physically present in Canada, right? And the other benefit of being a student is that you get to put a date on the calendar when you move to Canada, right? Because you'll be accepted for a program that starts, say, September of 2026. So now you know you and your family are moving there in August of 2025 or 2026. Right. As opposed to like throwing your resumes out and just sort of hoping that you're going to get a job offer. You don't know what's going to happen. An employer could say, okay, we'll hire you, but it has to be tomorrow. Well, that's no good. I've got to sell my house. I got to, quit my job. I got to move my kids, my family. The study option, you get to put a date on the calendar when you move, right? And I mean, for the most part too, like a lot of people that come to Canada for study, they don't even actually end up completing their studies because something arises. Like when they come in, they're in their first year of their master's program, suddenly they get a part-time job and they're working and they're, the employer says, hey, why aren't you working for me full time? What do I have to do to get you to work for me full time? And those questions come to me all the time. People phone me, employers call me, and they're like, hey, we got this student working for us. What do we do? So now you've transitioned yourself into a work permit just by being physically present in Canada, right? So the study option makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons for U.S. people coming to Canada. Even if you're single, you still got that opportunity to come in. You come in and do a study program and transition to a work permit, and now you're, going to find the opportunities you need to become a PR, a permanent resident. By the way, cost-wise for these study programs, it's expensive. It is international fees, but international fees are kind of like domestic fees in the US. Okay. So a master's program might cost you 20 to 25,000 Canadian per year. So you might be in it for like 50,000 for the 2 years, right? That's what is that, 35,000 USD? Okay. So like kind of comparable to what you pay for a master's in the US, I think, So, like study option 2, beautiful option, like because you get to choose your time, and it also puts a date on the calendar, gives you runway for being in Canada, and also your whole family gets status. It's beautiful. Best option I think there is out there for U.S. citizens immigrating to Canada. Third option. Third option is taking a look at business immigration. Okay, so if you have prior ownership of a business, or you've managed businesses before, and you want to invest capital into a new business in Canada, this is a PR pathway in itself, right? The way this works is every province in Canada has their own immigration stream or pathway that they consider like their own version of how to immigrate. They're called Provincial Nominee programs, PMPs for short. And every one of them has an entrepreneur pathway. So what this means is if you are an entrepreneur in your home country and you want to move a business to Canada, or you want to buy an existing business or start a new business, and you're willing to invest money, typically minimum you'd be looking at 250,000 Canadian, okay? Then there is a pathway for you to do this. Now, the benefit to Canada is that in this process, you're going to hire Canadian citizens. You can't just come into Canada and start a business for you, right? There's no benefit to Canada for that. You have to have some sort of, reciprocal effect, which would be jobs. Typically, like if you're going to open a coffee shop in Vancouver, you need, 5 or 10 people to staff it. Those people are going to come from the labor market in Canada. You're going to provide jobs. You're going to actually create jobs. So these business immigration streams for Canada all revolve around how many jobs you're going to create, right? And if you can show more jobs you're going to create, then you're going to have a much better application. And then how they work is basically if you get approved to do the business venture, you come into Canada, you set up your business, you get your work permits and everything, and then the provincial government will give you a contract that says, okay, you've agreed to do this, invest this much money over the course of this timeline. So if you do all these things, we will give you like what's called the nomination that allows you to apply for permanent residence. So, business immigration upside is that it is well suited for entrepreneurs who want to start businesses anyway, also who are not eligible for other pathways like study or, employment offers. Downside is it takes a bit longer. It might take 2 or 3 years to complete for a PR application. And also there is a cost, there is the risk of opening, starting, buying a business, there's the economy could tank and then suddenly you've got no product. There's no refunds, right? The government of Canada is not going to refund your $250,000 if your business doesn't survive, right? But, for the most part, it's a successful program because it encourages people from overseas to take chances on our economy and also create jobs. And that's what we want, right? So recapping, immigrating from the US to Canada, option 1 is always sponsorship. If you're married to a Canadian citizen, just literally go to my website and book a discovery call with me. I will tell you what the process is, okay, and how that works. Option 2 is the direct to employment pathway. So you have an employer in Canada who wants to hire you. They go through a bit of an application to get you. It's their application to make. They have to apply to the government to get you in, but then you're in, okay? And now you're working on your way to become a permanent resident. Option 3, study option. This is my favorite option because it just makes so much sense because it's flexible. You don't have to rely on one employer, for example. You can be up here, studying, working at the same time. Your kids are here, your spouse is here. You get to decide the date you come to Canada, which is very important. Option 3, or is this option 4 actually? Business immigration. So if you're entrepreneurial by nature, or if you've owned businesses before, if you want to start a new one in Canada, then there's a multitude of business options you can do. Like there's even federal programs that kind of, allow people to invest money and get work permits quite quickly. And all of those things, I've done before with people who immigrate to Canada, and it's unbelievable how quickly, you can get a work permit and come to Canada if you actually want to invest money in Canada, right? So, what the problem is in the business immigration, like people don't realize, like, working in Canada is not the same as becoming a permanent resident. So if you're interested in permanent residency, it's best to, get in touch with someone who's done that before, so that they, like how that works, because a lot of the federal programs don't really care if you get permanent residency or not. They just want you to get a work permit so you can come in and start your business. But a work permit does not necessarily mean that you're going to be eligible for PR. So that's why I like the provincial PMP programs, because they eventually get you to the PR stage, right? So I could do tons of content on that as well. Anyway, so, if you're new to this channel, obviously, if you look at the subscribers, we're very new. I'm new to YouTube. Questions and comments, please go ahead, leave me, something on your mind, or if you have a question for me, I will definitely try to get back to you on that. Also, check out our website where you can book a free call with me, to talk about your case. And then also we're on Instagram and TikTok. The goal for me is to get to 1,000 subscribers by September of 2025. And I'm at like 20 right now. So that needs to pick up a lot. If you enjoy the content, like, subscribe, share, comment. Thanks so much. And more content to come.